So what do you think? 1.9 trillion. I mean, I don't think that people entirely comprehend how much money this is, but just to keep it in perspective, during the Obama years when everybody was worked up about that stimulus to nowhere, that was 800 billion. Now we're talking about 1.9 trillion. A few questions here. Do we need it? And what are the long-term ramifications of this, sir?
Well, first of all, on the need, people forget that we have over $1 trillion from the last 5 COVID relief packages that have not even been spent yet. That money includes money for things like education. There's money in there for small businesses, et cetera. It just has not been distributed yet. And so now you're going to add $2 trillion into it and add to our national debt and add to our structural deficit. And as you know, most of it is going to go for things that have nothing to do with COVID. So here's some examples. You're going to have a $15 an hour minimum wage, federal minimum wage. That's in this bill. That's a job killer of about 1.4 to 1.5 million jobs, and that's a conservative estimate by the Congressional Budget Office. You are talking about $170 million going to the National Endowments for the Arts, $170 go to the National Endowment for the Humanities, $750 million going overseas, $50 million going to family planning, including abortions in the United States. You've got something like $400 million going to see what animals might be more susceptible to getting sick from COVID than not. I mean, this is just filled with pork, and it's larded up, and it's kind of like a Christmas tree. You're going to different members and saying, what does it take to get you to vote for this? And they're putting it on there. And it's 1.9 trillion. And guess what? They said that's just the beginning.
Just the beginning, right? Just a down payment. I mean, I'm horrified because when I look at what the teachers are asking for example, the education groupies that want $128 billion. Do you know, Congressman, only $6 billion of that is actually going to education to reopen schools for this year, 2021. The rest is spread out over a 7-year period. And I'm like, wait, does this mean we're not going to open schools for 7 years? I mean, already you've got districts in Minnesota that are saying we're making no plans to open for the fall. We're planning on being online. I just look at this and say, why do you guys need so much money if you're not even reopening the darn schools?
Well, if you can get money, people want it. And the teachers' union's no different. I mean, that's really, it's outrageous. And Trish, there will be a comeuppance. You cannot continue to spend like this and add to the national debt in excess of, which sits in excess of $30 trillion today, and not at some point have to deal with that. And that's just a crying shame here.
You always have been a voice of reason there. And, I think back to sort of the beginnings of the Tea Party and how outspoken you have been for the importance of fiscal discipline. And I feel like right now that's completely just sort of lost. And there's this desire, like just throw everything at the situation. Talk to me about what we're giving up, because it feels like so many politicians, frankly, they're willing to do this because in the here and now, it helps buy them whatever they need, with their constituents. But it's not, what about the kids? What about our grandkids? What about the country's future? How does that actually play in when, kids and grandkids can't vote?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, Trish, we face a time where there will be inflation in this country. There's already inflationary pressures coming. And when that inflation pressure comes and you have the massive debt that we have, we're not going to be able to pay for it. And that means that you're going to, if interest rates go up, for instance, just a little bit, we can't afford to pay for the debt on what we're borrowing. And if that's the case, you have a chance to ruin your economy now and in the future. And what that means is our kids and our grandkids will be left to try to pick up the pieces of a shattered economy. And those things can go on, as you know, for many years and sometimes even generationally. The other aspect of it is it provides an opportunity for some authoritarian types to get into government and say, well, it's such a disaster and a mess, I'm going to clean it up. And what they do is they take away rights that we recognize as being inherent from God. So we face actual collapse of the country down the road because we're being short-sighted today. And to be honest with you, I've got businesses who say, look, I don't need any more money. What I need you is to open up the economy. If you open up the economy, I'll be fine. I can survive.
Sure. I mean, I look at some of the data points we've already seen, and I'm pretty impressed. But you start putting things like $15 minimum wages in, and you've got a lot of businesses that can't support that. It's going to create inflation because they'll have to raise prices. That's if they can continue to exist. I think you have a lot of businesses going out of business in that kind of scenario. And the inflation is a real concern. Just look at the softness in the U.S. dollar recently. I want to turn to, because you mentioned something very important, Congressman. You talked about rights. And right now, increasingly, we're living in the cancel culture world. I mean, I'm living proof of it. You can't say that coronavirus became too political, or else, oh my gosh, they're going to go after you tooth and nail. So we're now, it's cascading right upon itself, and we're now seeing, Congressman, that Democrats are calling on the FCC to cancel Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, anything, frankly, that doesn't agree with their line of thinking.
Well, I'm outraged by it, and you got canceled, and I've been canceled for short terms. I've been in the penalty box from time to time, but the reality is, Tricia, I've said this for years. The left in America has an authoritarian bent to them that most people don't recognize. But in order to fulfill their policies, it's always authoritarian, and they don't like dissent. They don't like opposition. They don't like comment from people who disagree with them. And they only advocate for tolerance if you agree with them. If you don't, then they're going to be intolerant of you. And that's what we're seeing today, this move to stifle, try to get the FCC to dereg these outlets that disagree with CNN and MSNBC. This effort to cancel anybody who's a celebrity, an actor, an athlete who might have a conservative viewpoint, who might have supported President Trump. It doesn't matter, because you are the opposition. They don't want to hear from you, and that is tyranny. That is tyranny at its most basic and fundamental definition. And if we can't have the ability to speak, associate, worship, well, we don't look like any other nation. We begin to look like every other nation in the world, instead of being the United States of America, the bastion of freedom, recognition of inherent God-given rights in each one of us, whether it's to defend ourselves with weapons or to speak out and participate in our electoral process. That's what they're killing. That's what they're killing.
It really is. It's understanding the importance of the individual. And even though we're a big country, right, we have to accept that everybody is an individual, and we have to respect the individual. And that's what America has always been known for. It's North Korea or the former Soviet Union that, would stifle sides that they don't agree with. And, to me, Rush Limbaugh, I'm curious to get your thought, but he was, I didn't know him, actually. People have been surprised by that. I never met him, but I think the fact that he was able to speak out and continue to speak out so freely, Congressman, was sort of proof of what's good about this country, right? You may not agree with him. You may absolutely hate what he's saying, but the reality is he could say it, because in a free country, you should be able to.
No, that's exactly right. And Rush Limbaugh, I remember as a young lawyer, in Arizona, and you would think that in Arizona it would have been safe to be pretty conservative, and it generally was. But we were ostracized and ridiculed for being conservative. But Rush Limbaugh made that cool. He made it acceptable, and he took on the left. Well, they don't want that kind of discussion anymore. They're not willing to entertain that. They don't want to win on the basis of ideas. They want to win on the basis of control and power. And that's where the left is today, and that's largely the base of the Democrat Party. And so we're facing a system that has maybe probably 35, 40% of the country that's perfectly okay with an authoritarian form of government. And so if you and I can't go worship, if we can't associate, if we can't speak and debate these things, I fear for the long-term trajectory of freedom in this country.
I do too. I mean, and it's a combination of things. It's the freedom of speech. It's freedom to prosper, right? Janet Yellen just saying this week that they're looking at raising taxes, of course, from 21% on companies to 28%. They're looking at upping the capital gains tax. I mean, it's going to become a kind of suffocation, if you would, of speech and ability to prosper, businesses being shut down. I suspect that there's going to be some people that are nostalgic for the years 2016, 17, 18, 19, when the economy was booming and we actually had policies that allowed businesses to flourish. And that was, very much a result of very sound policies out of the Trump administration. We are expecting Donald Trump, of course, to take to the stage at CPAC this weekend. Can you give us a sense of what you think we might hear? Do you think he's back in the running for 2024, or is the Republican Party moving on? Your 2 cents.
I think that we don't win if we move on. I think the policies that you just iterated that President Trump stands for, I think that's where the Republican Party is. That's where the mainstream of America, I believe, is. We're still a center-right country. That's why we're being suppressed by the left. I think President Trump, I think he's going to talk about his role in the party, that's necessary for him to continue to be a leader. I think it is necessary for him to be a leader, to speak out and advocate for the principles that we were so prosperous, Trish. More people working than ever, every demographic. Those are the things that Americans want to do, and that's inclusive. That's not separating like the left's doing right now. That's inclusive. It brings people together, brings us as a nation together, and so. I think he's going to say that he's going to continue to speak out and be a voice for rationality, believe it or not. And I am already nostalgic for those years, Trish, 2016 to 2019.
Yeah, they were tremendous years, and taxes went down for corporations and for individuals. But yet our revenue went up. We had record tax revenue. And that's proof, right, to me. That's proof. If you map this thing out, it's not rocket science. You just kind of need to free up Americans to do what Americans know how to do.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's odd that way, but freedom tends to be good for everybody. I mean, Ronald Reagan said, a rising tide lifts all boats. You never saw it demonstrated more fully than after the tax cuts and regulatory reductions that the Trump administration put in. And then you saw people of every demographic group benefiting.
Is there anything that he should do differently to bring, you mentioned that the country is center-right. I agree with you on that, Representative Biggs. I don't think the country is in any way, shape, or form willing to go the route of Bernie Sanders, AOC, or where Biden is trying to take us. But there was this, polarization, right, that happened. How can Donald Trump move the party forward and bring in more of those people in the middle, right? Don't forget, record turnout for Hispanics and blacks, and he was able to really bring in a lot of groups that previously had not been okay with the Republican Party, but he lost a lot of women. He lost a lot of people in the middle, and the left made it all about personality, right? Instead of policy, which drove me bonkers because I'm a policy wonk. But how do you negotiate and thread that needle in the coming environment, given where the left is?
Well, I think first of all, he needs to continue with the narrative that the Republican Party stands with the working men and women of this country. The vast majority of this country are working men and women. And the second thing is he needs to talk about the security and safety and what he did with COVID and how he delivered the vaccine. I think that is so important to women, suburban women voters. They want to know that we understand the concerns they have over safety. And then I guess the third thing is they all everybody wants their kids to be able to get the education that will allow them to succeed in life. And if you continue to lock down and prevent kids from getting education the way the Biden administration is doing with its hand-in-glove association with teachers' unions, you are preventing children from getting the necessary education they need, and nothing is better than in-person education on a daily basis.
I think that's where you get a lot of women, because There's nothing more important than our children, and there is nothing more important than making sure that they have the opportunities to succeed in the future, and that is education. And it's really disgusting and atrocious when you see that so many of these schools have stayed shut down, and these kids in disenfranchised environments are becoming increasingly disenfranchised. Very quickly, and I think those are great points, and I suspect he will zero in on those, and he should. But let me turn to Texas briefly. Your thoughts on why this happened and how we fix it, Representative?
Well, you can never be perfectly prepared for a once in 500-year storm like Texas had. But one of the things that you can do is understand the limitations of what you do have in case that occurs. And I think this notion that we're going to rely on wind energy for 20 to 30% of our power grid, with failing to understand that they have mechanical problems, number one, but number two, wind doesn't always blow, and you've got to have a backup grid of what do we have? Natural gas and coal and nuclear. Those are far more sustainable. And I realize that wind can get cheaper, et cetera, but we weren't prepared, and Texas wasn't prepared for this kind of storm, and that's part of the problem. But when you mandate all these Green New Deal type of energy plans, which is what a lot of wind is, you're going to need to realize that the grid must be sustainable when you cannot get this solar or this wind energy. So you got to have the natural gas and coal and nuclear backup. And they were just unprepared for that.
Just your final thoughts on the Republican Party. I mentioned it briefly before, but we're seeing that people are very much still with Donald Trump. Almost half the Republican Party, according to a new poll, is willing to leave should he start a new party and go with him there. So in light of sort of the Mitch McConnells of the world and others in the so-called establishment of the Republican Party, how does it all come together? Do you think that Mitch McConnell will come around? Do you think the Republican Party will come around? Do you think that something new gets started? What's your sense of where this is all heading?
Well, I am concerned about it because I'm forecasting that if the race were to happen today, we'd lose 10 to 12% of votes. 2/3 of those from Republicans who don't trust Republican leadership anymore, whether it's McConnell or Liz Cheney, or else another 4 to 5% who say they don't want have anything to do with Donald Trump. I mean, we've got people within the Republican Party that are willing to emasculate the direction of a conservative policy, pro-America first, incredible economic growth, because they don't like Donald Trump's personality. And that concerns me to no end, because that's a question I get all the time. How do we get people back together? And the best way to get people back together is to learn to forgive each other. But you don't forgive each other, and you don't get unity when you're making lists of people you're going to attack. And I'm on a number of Republican hit lists, Trish. I know you're going to be surprised by that, but they've run ads in my state, my district, because I've supported President Trump and his policies, and that's not good. That's no bueno. And it's what that means is in my district, I will win my district, but you will undermine where a statewide officer might go, because you're going to create dissension amongst our people, and that'll make it difficult to win a U.S. Senate race, which we have, a governor's race. We have got to come together and recognize we have disagreements within our party, but by and large, we all agree to the party platform, and that's where we need to be, and we need to go forward, because the other side are the ones that going to emasculate our rights, our freedoms, and our economy.